Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are pulling back the curtain on a series of stories that reveal a massive global power shift happening right now, in real time, and almost nobody is talking about the connections between them.
I'm Maya Clarity, and what we've uncovered tonight is genuinely alarming. The European Union just gutted its own technology independence strategy. Meanwhile, Chinese companies are unveiling electric vehicles and hypercar concepts that make Western automakers look like they're standing still. These stories are not separate. They are chapters in the same book.
We're going to take you through 5 stories tonight, and by the end, you're going to see a pattern that should concern every citizen in a democratic nation. We're talking about governments surrendering strategic advantage, corporations racing ahead without oversight, and a technological arms race where the West just blinked.
We've verified every claim through primary sources, leaked documents, and technical specifications. This is investigative journalism, not opinion. So buckle up, because the truth doesn't care about your comfort level.
Let's get into it. Story 1 is a bombshell out of Brussels, and it starts with a leaked draft that the European Commission probably wishes had never seen daylight.
Breaking news from the South China Morning Post reporting out of Hong Kong. The European Union has taken its ambitious Industrial Accelerator Act, a policy specifically designed to counter China's technological dominance, and ripped the heart right out of it. They've stripped artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and quantum computing from the list of strategic technologies that must be manufactured in Europe to access billions in government funding.
Let me say that again so it sinks in. The EU created a plan to compete with China on critical technologies. And before the ink was even dry, before the European Commission could formally unveil the proposal on Wednesday, they removed the 3 most important technology categories from the plan. A. Chips, and quantum computing. According to the leaked draft obtained by the South China Morning Post, biotechnology and robotics were also cut from the Industrial Accelerator Act.
This is not a minor revision, Alex. This is a capitulation. The entire point of the IAA was to ensure that Europe could produce its own critical technologies instead of depending on foreign suppliers, primarily China and to some extent the United States. The plan was supposed to unlock billions in government funds for European manufacturers of these strategic technologies. Now, the technologies that actually matter for the next 50 years of geopolitical competition have been removed.
So who lobbied for this? That's the question we need to ask. Because semiconductor fabs cost tens of billions of dollars to build. AI training clusters require massive investment. Quantum computing labs are extraordinarily expensive. European companies and governments were looking at those price tags and flinching. But here's the thing, China didn't flinch. China spent those billions. And now Europe is essentially saying, we'll just buy from whoever is cheapest.
The leaked draft reportedly showed that plans to exclude non-EU-based producers from accessing these funds were also being watered down. Think about what that means in practice. European taxpayer money, earmarked to build European technological sovereignty, could now flow to companies based in China or elsewhere. The very nations the policy was designed to counter could end up as beneficiaries of European industrial subsidies.
This is a pattern we've seen before. Europe talks big on strategic autonomy, then caves to corporate lobbying and short-term cost concerns. Remember the 5G debate? Europe spent years agonizing over whether to ban Huawei equipment from its telecom networks. Some countries did, many didn't. The result was a patchwork approach that satisfied nobody and left critical infrastructure vulnerable.
And here's the deeper structural problem. The United States has the CHIPS Act, pouring over $50 billion into domestic semiconductor manufacturing. China has its Made in China 2025 strategy and massive state subsidies for AI and quantum research. Europe was supposed to have the Industrial Accelerator Act as its answer. Now that answer has been hollowed out. The 3 major powers in the technology race, the US is spending big, China is spending bigger, and Europe just decided to sit this one out.
The timing is particularly damning. This comes as tensions between the West and China over technology transfer, intellectual property, and supply chain security are at an all-time high. For Europe to weaken its tech-independent strategy now sends a clear signal to Beijing, and that signal is that Europe is not serious about competition.
Who benefits from this decision? Large multinational corporations that want to source the cheapest components regardless of origin. Chinese tech firms that can now potentially access European subsidies. And short-sighted politicians who can avoid the difficult conversations about long-term investment. Who loses? European workers, European startups, and ultimately European sovereignty. When you don't make your own chips, you don't control your own future.
Now let's pivot to our second story, and this one is going to sound like science fiction, but it's published research coming out of the academic community. It involves a breakthrough in something called plasmonic ratchets, and the implications for computing and communications technology are significant.
This comes from a paper published on AR14, the preprint server where cutting-edge physics research appears before formal peer review. Researchers have demonstrated a ratchet mechanism using arrays of evanescently coupled plasmonic waveguides with tailored losses. Now, let me translate that from physicist to English, because this matters.
Please do, because I read the abstract 3 times and I needed a coffee after each one.
Here's the breakthrough in plain language. These researchers figured out how to control the direction that light signals travel through nanoscale waveguides by deliberately engineering specific patterns of energy loss into the system. And here's the counterintuitive finding that makes this genuinely remarkable. They found that increasing local dissipation, meaning increasing the amount of energy deliberately lost at specific points, actually produced better directional transport and lower overall losses in the transmitted signal.
Wait. They're saying that by losing more energy at targeted points, the system actually performs better overall? That seems to violate basic intuition about efficiency.
Exactly, and that's why this is important. Using flow K-theory, which is the mathematical framework for analyzing systems with periodic time-dependent behavior, the researchers uncovered a driving regime that allows efficient directional transport. Think of it like a one-way valve for light at the nanoscale. You can push photons in one direction through a waveguide but not the other, and you achieve this through precisely calculated patterns of energy loss rather than through traditional gain mechanisms.
The applications here are potentially enormous. Plasmonic waveguides are already being explored as components in next-generation computing architectures that could process information using light instead of electricity. If you can efficiently control the direction of signal flow through engineered dissipation, you're looking at potential breakthroughs in optical computing, telecommunications, and quantum information processing.
And here's where this connects to our first story. This is exactly the kind of fundamental research that underpins the next generation of semiconductor and computing technology. The EU just removed AI, chips, and quantum from its strategic technology list. Meanwhile, researchers around the world are making breakthroughs that will define who controls the computing platforms of the future. Europe's decision to step back from strategic investment in these areas means breakthroughs like this are more likely to be commercialized in China or the United States.
The research community doesn't operate in a vacuum. When governments signal that certain technologies are not strategic priorities, funding flows elsewhere. Talented researchers follow the money. And within a decade, the countries that invested in fundamental physics research like plasmonic ratchets will be the ones manufacturing the next generation of processors and communication systems.
It's worth noting that this kind of research, joint experimental and theoretical work on nanoscale photonic systems, requires expensive laboratory infrastructure and sustained institutional support. Countries that are cutting investment in these areas are not just losing a budget line item. They're losing the pipeline of talent and innovation that produces competitive advantage for decades to come.
Now let's shift gears dramatically, but stay on the same theme. Story 3, Xiaomi, the Chinese smartphone giant, has just revealed the full specifications of a vehicle that redefines what an electric hypercar can be. And the details are, frankly, staggering.
Reporting from Electrek, Xiaomi unveiled the complete technical breakdown of its Vision Gran Turismo electric hypercar concept at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. This is a concept vehicle, so it's not heading to showrooms tomorrow. But the specifications tell us where Chinese automotive engineering is headed, and that direction is straight past the competition.
The headline number is 1900 horsepower. 1900. For context, a standard Tesla Model S Plaid produces around 1100 horsepower, and that's considered one of the most powerful production electric vehicles on the road today. Xiaomi's concept produces nearly double that.
But the raw power isn't even the most interesting part. According to Electrek's reporting, the Vision GT features a magnetic wheel system that keeps the wheel covers stationary while the car is in motion. That's not just an aesthetic trick. That's a demonstration of precision electromagnetic engineering at a level that most Western automakers haven't attempted even as a concept.
Let's put this in context. Xiaomi started as a smartphone company. They entered the electric vehicle market relatively recently. And they're already producing concept vehicles with specifications that rival or exceed anything coming from established European and American hypercar makers like Bugatti, Rimac, or Tesla. The speed of development is the story here as much as the specifications themselves.
This speaks to a fundamental advantage in the Chinese tech ecosystem. Companies like Xiaomi can leverage massive vertical integration, government support, and an enormous domestic market to iterate and innovate at a pace that Western competitors struggle to match. They're not bound by the same shareholder expectations for quarterly returns. They can invest in moonshot projects like a 1900 horsepower hypercar concept because the long-term strategic value outweighs short-term profitability concerns.
And this isn't happening in isolation. Xiaomi's Vision GT is a statement of intent. It says, we can compete at the absolute pinnacle of automotive engineering. If we can build this as a concept, imagine what our production vehicles will look like in 5 years. Every European and American automaker should be looking at this and feeling a deep chill down their spine.
The magnetic wheel cover system deserves additional attention because it illustrates the breadth of engineering expertise at play. This isn't just about putting bigger motors in a car. It's about integrating electromagnetic systems, materials science, software control, and precision manufacturing into a cohesive platform. That's the kind of cross-disciplinary engineering capability that takes decades to build, and Xiaomi appears to have built it in a fraction of that time.
And remember, this is the same country whose technology sector the EU just decided not to strategically compete with by gutting the Industrial Accelerator Act. The connection couldn't be more clear.
Now let's move to story 4, and this one is arguably even more consequential than the hypercar, because it's about production vehicles that real consumers will actually buy. BYD has just claimed the title of the world's longest-range electric vehicle.
Electrek is reporting that BYD has unveiled fully electric vehicles with over 1,036 kilometers of range on a single charge. That's 643 miles for those of us used to imperial measurements. They previewed the new Denza Z9 GT and BYD is claiming it is, quote, the world's longest pure electric driving range vehicle, end quote.
To understand why this matters, you need to know that range anxiety has been the single biggest barrier to mass EV adoption worldwide. The average American drives about 37 miles per day. The average European drives slightly less. A vehicle with over 600 miles of range essentially eliminates range anxiety as a concern. You could drive from New York to Chicago on a single charge with range to spare.
The range figure uses the CLTC standard, which is the China Light-Duty Vehicle Test Cycle. Now, CLTC numbers tend to be more generous than the EPA ratings used in the United States or the WLTP cycle used in Europe. Real-world range would likely be somewhat lower. But even accounting for a 20 to 30% reduction in real-world conditions, you're still looking at a vehicle with over 450 miles of practical range. That exceeds virtually every electric vehicle currently on sale in Western markets.
And here's the strategic dimension. BYD has become the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer. They're not a startup. They're not a concept car maker. They are shipping millions of vehicles annually, and they're now demonstrating battery technology that outpaces what Tesla, Volkswagen, BMW, or any Western manufacturer can currently deliver. This is the direct result of years of massive investment in battery chemistry, manufacturing scale, and vertical integration.
BYD makes their own batteries. They make their own chips. They make their own electric motors. That vertical integration means they control costs at every level of the supply chain. When European and American automakers are buying batteries from suppliers, often Chinese suppliers, BYD is manufacturing them in-house at lower cost with better performance. That structural advantage is widening, not narrowing.
The policy implications are enormous. Western governments are scrambling to impose tariffs on Chinese EVs. The EU has already implemented additional duties. The United States has raised tariffs significantly. But tariffs are a defensive measure. They protect domestic manufacturers from competition, but they don't make domestic manufacturers more competitive. When BYD can offer a vehicle with over 1,000 kilometers of range at a price point that undercuts Western competitors, tariffs become a tax on consumers rather than a spur to innovation.
And this connects directly back to our first story. The EU's Industrial Accelerator Act was supposed to be the offensive counterpart to defensive tariffs. It was supposed to invest in European manufacturing capability so that European companies could actually compete on technology and price. Instead, the act has been gutted. So Europe is left with tariffs as its only tool, a wall to hide behind rather than a platform to build from.
Who loses here? European and American workers in the auto industry. Companies that failed to invest in next-generation battery technology. And consumers who will pay higher prices for inferior products because their governments chose protectionism over investment. Who wins? BYD, Chinese battery manufacturers, and ultimately Chinese workers who are building the products the world actually wants.
Let's round out our coverage with Story 5. The Polestar 4 ICE driving event in Quebec. Now, this might seem like lighter fare compared to geopolitical tech policy and 1,000-kilometer EVs, but there's a deeper story here about what happens when a Western-Chinese partnership actually works.
Electrek's Peter Johnson spent a full day drifting the Polestar 4 on ice at Quebec's Mécaglis track and came away, quote, seriously impressed with how well Polestar has tuned the dynamics of its 544 horsepower electric SUV coupe. This is the dual-motor all-wheel drive version, and by all accounts, the chassis dynamics and power delivery are exceptional.
Here's what makes this story interesting in the context of everything else we've discussed tonight. Polestar is a Swedish brand. It was born from Volvo's performance division. But Volvo is owned by Geely, the Chinese automotive conglomerate. So Polestar exists in this fascinating middle space between European design and engineering heritage and Chinese manufacturing capability and investment.
The ICE driving event at Mechaglis revealed how well the Polestar 4's all-wheel drive system manages power distribution in low traction conditions. Johnson described experiencing the system in, quote, slow motion, being able to feel exactly how the car manages torque between the front and rear axles during drifts. That kind of dynamic refinement requires thousands of hours of engineering and calibration work, and it suggests that the Polestar-Geely partnership is producing genuinely world-class results.
This is significant because it challenges the simplistic narrative that Chinese involvement in Western companies is purely about technology transfer and exploitation. In the Polestar case, you have Swedish engineers and Chinese manufacturing working together to produce a product that neither could have created alone. The 544 horsepower, the fine-tuned dynamics, the competitive pricing, that's a product of genuine collaboration.
But it also raises uncomfortable questions. If the most compelling electric vehicles in the world are either wholly Chinese, like BYD and Xiaomi, or Chinese-backed, like Polestar, what does that say about the ability of purely Western companies to compete? Ford, GM, Stellantis, Volkswagen, BMW, they're all struggling with the EV transition. Their vehicles are often more expensive and less capable than Chinese competitors. The Polestar model suggests that Western-Chinese collaboration might produce better outcomes than Western-only or Chinese-only approaches, but that's politically toxic in the current environment.
And that's where the policy failure becomes most acute. Instead of creating frameworks for productive collaboration while protecting genuine security interests, Western governments are oscillating between total openness and total protectionism. The EU strips its industrial policy of meaningful technology requirements. The US imposes blanket tariffs. Neither approach actually addresses the fundamental competitiveness gap.
The Polestar 4 on ice is a metaphor that almost writes itself. A vehicle navigating a slippery surface, finding traction through sophisticated engineering, maintaining control through precise calibration. That's exactly what Western technology policy needs to do, and it's exactly what it's failing to do.
Now let's pull all 5 of these stories together, because the pattern is unmistakable once you see it.
Here's the through line. We are witnessing a fundamental realignment of global technological power, and it's happening faster than most people realize. China is pushing the boundaries of what's possible in electric vehicles, with BYD delivering over 1,000 kilometers of range and Xiaomi conceptualizing 1,900 horsepower hypercars. The basic science that will define the next generation of computing, like the plasmonic ratchet research, is advancing rapidly. And at exactly this moment, the European Union has chosen to retreat from strategic technology investment.
Think about these stories as a system. China invests massively in battery technology, and BYD achieves world record EV range. China invests in cross-disciplinary engineering, and Xiaomi produces a hypercar concept that embarrasses established Western brands. Meanwhile, Europe had a plan to counter this trend, the Industrial Accelerator Act, and gutted it before it was even announced. That's not a coincidence. That's a surrender.
The fundamental research story is the sleeper here. Breakthroughs in plasmonic waveguides and nanoscale photonic systems are the building blocks of future technologies. The countries and institutions that invest in this research today will control the computing and communications platforms of the future. When governments signal through policy decisions like the IAA gutting that these technologies are not priorities, they're not just making a budget decision. They're making a civilizational choice.
And the Polestar story shows us an alternative path that nobody wants to talk about. Genuine collaboration between Western expertise and Chinese capability can produce exceptional results. But in an era of rising nationalism and trade wars, that collaborative model is being undermined from both sides. Chinese companies are being shut out of Western markets through tariffs. Western companies are being pressured to decouple from Chinese supply chains. The Polestar model of productive partnership may not survive the current political environment.
What we're really seeing is a failure of strategic vision on the part of Western governments. They can't decide whether to compete, collaborate, or contain. So they do all 3 badly. The EU strips its industrial policy. The US imposes tariffs but doesn't invest adequately in domestic alternatives. Nobody has a coherent strategy for managing the technology transition that's already underway.
And the people who pay the price are ordinary citizens. Workers whose jobs are threatened by competition they can't match. Consumers who pay more for less capable products. Taxpayers whose money is spent on policies that don't actually achieve strategic objectives. The leaked draft of the Industrial Accelerator Act isn't just a policy document. It's a confession of failure by European leadership.
So what should viewers take away from tonight's report? First, pay attention to industrial policy. It's not glamorous, but it determines who controls the technologies that shape daily life. Second, be skeptical of both protectionism and unregulated openness. Neither extreme produces good outcomes. Third, demand that your elected representatives have a coherent technology strategy, because right now, most of them don't.
And that brings us to the core question we always come back to on this show. Who is making these decisions, and who are they really serving? When the EU strips AI and chips from its strategic technology list, is that serving European citizens? Or is it serving multinational corporations that want the cheapest supply chain regardless of strategic consequences?
When Chinese companies demonstrate capabilities that dwarf Western competitors, is the right response tariffs and trade walls? Or is it the kind of serious, sustained investment in research, manufacturing, and education that actually produces competitive industries?
These are the questions your leaders should be answering. And if they're not answering them, you need to ask why. Who benefits from inaction? Who profits from strategic ambiguity? Follow the money, follow the power, and you'll find the truth.
That's what we do here at Truth Report. We follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads to uncomfortable conclusions about the leaders and institutions we're told to trust.
Before we go, remember that every story we covered tonight is connected. The EU's policy retreat, the plasmonic research breakthrough, the Xiaomi hypercar, the BYD range record, and the Polestar collaboration model. These are all facets of the same global transformation. Don't let anyone tell you these are separate stories. They are one story, and it's the most important story of our time.
If these stories matter to you, share this episode. Talk about these issues with your friends, your family, your colleagues. The decisions being made right now about technology policy, industrial strategy, and international competition will shape the world for the next generation. You deserve to be informed.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. And never stop asking questions.
I'm Maya Clarity. The truth is out there, but only if you're willing to look for it. We'll see you